Okay, so we're in the Shoftim Perek Daled. We're learning about the subjugation of at least the north, maybe not the whole country, but the north of Eretz Yisrael by Yavin, who is described as the king of Canaan, who had formerly ruled in Chatzor, but he is now in a place called Charosh Hagoyim, and we discussed yesterday that essentially he does not have a single ethnic group. He has different Kenites that he reassembled and created as a Malchus. His general is Sisera. Sisera has 900 chariots. And here, Hashem communicates a nevuah to Devaira to tell Barak to gather an army to fight against Sisera. And this army comprises 10,000 people, only from two tribes. So this was not a national fight, although we'll see that other people did participate. But this is an army of only two tribes, Zevulun and Naphtali, which are up north around the Yam Kinneret. They assemble at Har Tavor, which is a high mountain in the area, overlooking the river or the stream of Kishon, Nachal Kishon. And when Sisera hears that they're assembled there, so Sisera goes out to wage war against them. And the Pasuk says, looking at Pasuk Yud, after Devorah said that if you win, people will not give you kavod, because they say it is through a woman that Sisera was delivered, but still Devorah comes along. Pasuk Yud says that Barak assembled Zevulun, Naphtali, 10,000 people, etc. Devorah went with him. And then the pasuk is very, very obscure. Devorah tells Barak, this is the day that God has delivered your enemies into your hands. And Barak went down from Har Tavor. Okay, so initially they're at a high place. Sisera's on the lower level. They come down. They engage in a war. And it simply tells us, the pasuk is very obscure. The truth is, the details of what happened are actually revealed. It's very odd. They are not revealed in the narrative. They are revealed in the after-the-fact song of Devaira. The song of Devaira will give us details that we did not have here. Here, the only thing the Torah describes is, Pasuk Tesvav, Vayaham Hashem. God confused, God confounded Sisera and all of his chariots, and they fell by the sword in front of Barak, and Sisera had to abandon his chariot, and he fled alone. I talk about the captain being the last guy to go down with the ship. This is the opposite. Sisera sees things are not going well, so Sisera simply leaves the army and tries to seek his own personal safety. Now, what's going on here exactly? So the truth is, you see in the Shiur Devaira that Hashem actually did a miracle, although the miracle is not recorded in the narrative. It's a little strange. And that is, what happened was, Nachal Kishon. All right, so here you have to know a little bit of geography that can actually help you. Nachal Kishon is not a river. Nachal Kishon is a wadi. It's an Arabic word. If you're familiar with what a wadi is a stream that during the rainy season is full, and in the summer it often dries out. Okay? But once in a while, wadis can have flash floods. All of a sudden there might be a flood, and the wadi can become tremendously torrential. It can overflow. So that's exactly what kind of happened here. It was somewhat of a miracle exactly in the timing. And what happened was, Sisera is assembled with this huge army, and all of a sudden, there's a huge rainstorm. Okay, now rain per se does not stop a war, but the wadi that could normally be easily crossed by foot, when it's not raining, all of a sudden it became torrential. It became a flood area. And not only that, but the bank of the wadi became thick mud. The chariots got stuck. They couldn't move. They couldn't go anywhere. It's actually similar. In Mitzrayim, it says that the Egyptians got stuck, the chariots got stuck in the mud of the Yam Suf. and then the water closed in on them. Here, there was not a splitting of the Red Sea, but there was a mud. All the chariots got stuck. The soldiers couldn't move. So Sisera abandons his chariot and runs. But on the other hand, that made all of the soldiers in the Nachal Kishon, they were now vulnerable to be mowed down because they were just not able to move, in a sense. So was this miraculous? So it's interesting. It all depends on how you understand miracles. It was not necessarily a nes nigla, an open revealed miracle, in the sense of the Red Sea, where the water splits. It was a miracle within the laws of nature that exactly at that moment there would be a flooding of the wadi, and Sisera and his chariots all got stuck. So this is what is called a hidden miracle, in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses the natural processes of weather to create miraculous results. So now so part one is simply the defeat of Sisera's army through the flooding of Nachal Kishon and the mud. Part two is the individual fate of Sisera himself. Sisera abandons the battlefield. As I say, one would not expect that of a leader necessarily, but at some point Sisera really just cares about his own survival. So he runs, and he passes the tent of a woman that is called Yael, Eshes, Chever Hakeni. Now, this itself is a strange designation. Normally you wouldn't say, this is the tent of the woman whose husband is so-and-so. We would normally define the tent as the husband. One possibility is Yael is widowed. Maybe she's not presently married. Chever Hakeni died. I'm going to discuss who Chever Hakeni is in a second. That's going to be very important. But apparently this was a known place, because we are told that Yavin, who had been the king of Chatzor, Sisera's boss, had kind of a peace treaty with the clan of Chever Hakeni. And as a result, Sisera reasons quite logically that this is an ally. This is a safe house. I can go to her and she will not turn me in or harm me, because Chever Hakeni, which is, again, he was the head of a whole clan, we have a relationship. So he goes into the tent. I'll come back in a moment to who Chever Hakeni is. And she says to him, "Come into my tent, do not be afraid." And he comes in, and there's almost something quasi-affectionate here. She covers him with a blanket because he's shivering in the cold. He's not that well. He then begs her for water. He says he's thirsty. You get the impression of a man that might be actually fairly sick as a result of everything that's going on. She initially covers him with a blanket. Instead of giving him water, she gives him milk. And this is fermented milk that actually is intoxicating. And that causes him to go into a very, very, very deep slumber. And when he is in a deep slumber, she takes the stake of a tent, the stakes that you put down a tent. She takes a hammer. She drives the tent stake right through his temples. Of course, he dies. And when Barak is doing a house-to-house search, tent-to-tent search for Sisera, he's the most wanted man on the FBI most wanted list. He finally comes to Yael's tent, and Yael says to him, "The man that you're looking for is right here, dead." Right? The death of Sisera. So the death of Sisera, again, Yavin's only power was through Sisera and Sisera's army. Sisera's army is destroyed. Sisera is destroyed. So Yavin, now it doesn't say Yavin was killed. It does not say that, but Yavin no longer had any power over Eretz Yisrael. So the threat was diffused. So again, from a feminist standpoint, not that I want to advocate interpreting Tanakh to a feminist viewpoint, but the women come out ahead. Barak, in a sense, gets stymied. He gets deprived of both accomplishments through a woman. He doesn't, his defeat of the army is only because Devorah is with him. And he doesn't even get to kill Sisera. That's also done by another woman, Yael, Eishes Chaver HaKeni. Now, who is Chaver HaKeni? Yael is his wife. So Chazal understands that Chaver is one of the 7 names of Yisro. Yisro actually has many, many names. Chaver is one of those names. Now, obviously, we don't mean to say her husband is Yisro, but he was named after the founder of the family. This is a great-great-grandson, whatever it would be. And this is Chaver. Now, according to that interpretation, since Chazal understood that Yisro converted to Judaism, although the Chumash does not say that beferish, but Chazal understood that the Bnei Yisrael converted to Judaism, that would actually make Chaver HaKeni Jewish. Yael would be Jewish as well, his Jewish wife. So it's a little peculiar that Chaver HaKeni had some type of peace treaty with Yavin. I mean, Yavin is a Canaanite. The Chiyuv was to eradicate the Canaanites, but once again, one might understand this simply because another fact about the Bnei Yisrael is, and we saw this earlier in Yoshua, they were wanderers, they were Bedouins, meaning it was their derech that they would move from place to place. So as a result, they moved from place to place, seeking pasture for their animals. So it's not that they made a peace treaty. In other words, basically they were stuck. I mean, they were in proximity to Yavin, so they kind of entered into a non-aggression pact, which was really for their advantage, that he shouldn't attack them. So that's one interpretation, that Chazal go in the Medrash, that Chaver is really Yisro, and again, not that this is Yisro, but this is a descendant of Yisro, which would make Chaver and Yael presumably Jewish, and the so-called peace covenant was simply a matter of self-protection, that they're a small group and they shouldn't be wiped out by the aggressions of Sisera. Others learn a little differently. Others learn that even if we assume these are members of Yisro's family, they don't necessarily have to be lineal descendants, which means they may have been part of Yisro's extended family who did not convert to Judaism. They were Goyim, but they were permitted to have residency in Eretz Yisrael as Gerei Toshav. Right? What is the halacha? A non-Jew is, in fact, even the seven nations, even them, and Kal V'chomer, any other non-Jewish nation, like Midianites, because remember, Yisro is from Midian, are permitted to live in Eretz Yisrael if, they don't have to become Jewish, if they accept the 7 mitzvahs of Noach, and they accept Jewish sovereignty over Eretz Yisrael, and they agree to taxation and the like. This is called a ger toshav, right? You understand this? A ger who is makabel to be Jewish, technically is called a ger tzedek, a righteous convert. But there's another type of ger, and that is a non-Jew who, it's actually a gerus ceremony. The question is, can we do that today? In which a non-Jew formally accepts in front of a Beis Din that they will keep the 7 mitzvahs of Noach, which they're chayav to do anyway. It's not like it creates a new obligation, but they have to declare it. And they are given what you might call citizenship in the land of Israel. They're entitled to tzedakah funds, right? So they could get welfare, so to speak. They can qualify for social welfare programs. And they are called Gerei Toshav. The chiddush of the Rambam, just to remind you, is that the institution of Ger Toshav even works for the 7 nations, and it even works for Amalek, amazingly enough. That's the Shitas Rambam. You may recall that according to Shitas Rashi, once the Jewish people cross the Yarden, the 7 nations have to be eradicated, and Amalek, no matter what, and the opportunity of Kabbalah's Zion mitzvos was only before they crossed the Yarden. This is a big machlokas, Rashi and the Rambam. And you have to go through all of Yoshua and Shoftim whenever there's a reference to these different pockets of nations still being around. Like, how could they be around? And you have to analyze it from the perspective of that machlokas. So when it comes to Chovav, we do have a machlokas. Was Chovav a direct descendant of Yisro, making him Jewish? And then we assume Yael is Jewish. Or do we assume that perhaps he's of the extended family of Yisrael that came to Eretz Yisrael, but these were Bedouins who did not convert to Judaism, but they were honored. In fact, let me just remind you, at the very beginning, when Yehoshua was going to conquer Yericho, he sent a warning to the Bnei Chovav to get out of the area. So you see that they were a cherished part of the population, whether they were Jewish or Gerei Toshav. You'd have the same machlokas over there. Okay, so if you ask me, is Yael Jewish? The answer would be, it all depends on who Chovav was. Was Chovav a Ger, or a descendant of Gerim, of Yisro, or was Chovav a Ger Toshav in that family? Okay, now, there is another statement about Yael that's quite amazing, and it has a bit of a controversial history. The Gemara in Nazir discusses the concept of Averah Lishma. Averah Lishma is a person who commits a sin, does an action that Hashem says you're not allowed to do, but they do it totally l'shem shamayim, for the sake of God. Now, obviously, many things are not averos. For example, if I'm mechalel Shabbos to save a life, that's not avera lishma, because it's not an avera. Avera lishma is a much more complex idea, and that is you're doing something the halacha does not permit you to do, but you're doing something legamri l'shem shamayim. Does Hashem look at that as a meritorious act? Or does Hashem look at it as a sinful act? Meaning just because your motives are good. If it's an Averah, it's an Averah. The halacha defines whether something is an Averah or not. Your subjective kavanah is not enough. So the Gemara uses Yael, and again, it seems to presuppose she was Jewish based on the Yisro idea, as an Averah Lishma, because the Gemara actually darshans, even though it's not in the Pasuk Beferish, but the Gemara darshans from the words of the Devorah's song, and when we get to it, I'll point out the exact words, that part of how she got him asleep was not only by the fermented milk, so watch out about that milk, it can really knock you out, it's like alcohol, but she had sexual relations with him. She was bail him, or he was, she was nivelis to him. And even though a Jew, Chazal are assuming it's a Jew, is not allowed to have sexual relations with a non-Jew, but she did it lishma in order to be matzil Am Yisrael. And even for Pikuach Nefesh, this wouldn't be much. Well, okay, that's going to be part of the question. The pashtus of the Gemara in Nazir is that Pikuach Nefesh, right? She says, well, this is the only way I'll kill Sisera, and that's going to save Jewish lives. But the problem is, this is Gilui Arayos. And Gilui Arayos are one of the Averis you cannot do, even to save lives. So B'pashtus, this was an act she was not allowed to do, but because her kavana was to be matzel Am Yisrael from the sakana of Sisera, this falls under the category of an Averah Lishma. Now, the truth of the matter is, this overlaps tremendously with Megillas Esther, which happened much later. Megillas Esther is a very parallel situation But you have to look at the story of Esther and Achashverosh. I'm going to digress a little bit because it is connected to Yael. You have to analyze Megillah Esther from two perspectives. You know, when I was in kindergarten, a long time ago, kindergartens were just invented. So they used to portray the story of Esther being chosen as queen. Yeah, this is modern day, relatively modern day schools, as kind of a beauty contest. Like, these beauty contests. And Esther is chosen as the most beautiful. From our perspective and from Esther's perspective, this was a tragedy. This was not winning a contest. This was a tragedy. Mordechai hid her in the basement, hoping, chas v'shalom, that something bad wouldn't happen. And she was forcibly seized against her will. Imagine, she's the wife of the Gadol Ador. She's a tzaddikas. She's a Neviah. And she's forced to have sexual relations with this guy. So this was not a simcha. But let's ask the initial question. How was Esther allowed, even if she was taken forcibly against her will? Yeah, she was taken against her will, for sure. But this is Gilei Arayos. Isn't there a chiyuv of Yehareg v'yal Yavor? In other words, she should have allowed herself to be killed. So the Gemara in Megillah asked this question. I'm sorry, the Gemara, Megillah and Sanhedrin asked this question, but it asked this question in a slightly different way. Here's how the Gemara asks it, and then Tosfos asks, why didn't the Gemara ask it the other way? The rule normally is you have to give your life only for the big three. Avodah Zarah, Gilei Arayos, Shvichas Damim. For any other Averah like Shabbos or Kashrus, if your life is at stake, you don't have to give your life. Okay? Pikuach nefesh. But then the Gemara says, that's only if it's a private violation. But if it's a public violation, b'far hesia, that means in front of 10 Jews, and they're doing it for the purpose of taking you away for your religion. So b'far hesia, you're mechuyev to be meiser nefesh, even for anything, even for a trivial minhag. If Jews wore distinctive shoelaces, and the Goyim say, we're going to kill you unless you change your shoelaces, and that's going to be b'far hesia, you're mechuyev to be meiser nefesh. Okay, you got that. There's the big three, even privately, and then everything else, if it's b'far hesia, and the motive is to be mavra you from religion. See, that's why if you're dangerously ill and you're eating treif, even b'far hesia, that's not a problem, because there's no one oppressing you to violate your religion, right? Okay. So the Gemara asks by Esther. The Gemara asks the kasha this strange way. The Gemara asks, how could Esther allow herself to be taken to Achashverosh against her will? She should have gone to her death because her being violated by Achashverosh was b'far hesia, in the sense that everybody knew about it. So Tosfos asks the kasha, why does the Gemara have a problem only because it is b'far hesia, even if nobody in the world would know about it? It's Giloi Arayos. Okay, it's important to note that the Gemara asks it from the vantage point of b'far hesia. It does not ask it from the vantage point of Giloi Arayos. So Tosfos brings a big chiddush in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, that sexual relations with a non-Jew is not considered Giloi Arayos. It's an Averah, but it's not Nichlal in Giloi Arayos, which means a very big Chiddush. So had it been done privately, Pikuach Nefesh would have allowed Esther to be Oiver, and that is why the Gemara had to say Bifar Hesia. A big Chiddush. Bias Akum is not Nichlal in Giloi Arayos. Rabbeinu Tam gives a reason that's not so complimentary and it's not politically correct, because he says Bias Akum is like Bias Behema, and Bias Behema is not Gilui Arayos. If somebody said to me, be with this Behema or else, as disgusting as that is, Halacha would say Pikuach Nefesh would allow it, because that's not called Arayos. Okay, that's Bias Behema. That also to me is a little bit of a Chiddush. And Rabbeinu Tam then extends it to every Bias Akum does not have a Shem Arayos. It is an Isser Bialma that would be Nitzcher for Pikuach Nefesh. So that's why, this is all in Taisus, that's why the Gemara doesn't ask the Kasha from Arayos, but the Gemara does ask the Kasha from Bifar Hesia. So now that we've addressed the question that wasn't asked, let's focus on the question that was asked and what the answer is going to be. Everything?
Esther, even though that she's still in Eshish, right? So doesn't it begin with adultery of Shiur? And also number two is when you have the Gemara in Breitowitz, the seventh paragraph, and it's saying the mitzvah be'avera is mutar as long as it's for the rabbi. That excludes the victory.
Yeah. Okay, I'll address that. Those are good questions. I mean, in terms of Esther being married to Mordechai, so again, many understand that Mordechai gave her a get. When she was taken to Achashverosh, he divorced her. So you wouldn't have Eshes Ish. Now, the Gemara asks the Kasha, how could Esther allow herself to be taken? She should have gone to her death because of Bifar Hesia. So the Gemara gives two answers. Answer number one is that Esther is Karka Olam. Karka Olam means like a piece of ground, meaning Esther in the sexual act, whatever relation she had with Achashverosh, this was a passive. She was acted upon. So the chiyuv of giving your life for this is only for the man that's doing an action and not for the woman that's being active. And now again, I want to point out, let's imagine the following scenario of a Jewish married woman, again, forgive me for being a little graphic, who is being raped by a Jewish man. Now, a Jewish married woman who's being raped by a Jewish man is 100% Gilui Arayos. The Gemara's heter of Karka Olam is only taking away the Gemara's kasha of Bifar Hesia. It's not addressing if Karka Olam is a heter in Gilui Arayos, because Rabbeinu Tam says Bias Akum is not Gilui Arayos. Meaning, the question that I'm asking, which is actually a Machlokas Rishonim, is if the Gemara is suggesting that Karka Olam, that a woman that's passive in Arayos, is not mechuyeves to give up her life, because only active violations have to give up their life and not passive. Would that be a heter for Gilui Arayos? Because again, the Gemara is bringing up Karka Olam in a context where Gilui Arayos is not the issue. So that's a big machlokas rishonim if Karka Olam is a teretz even for Gilui Arayos, or it's only a teretz for non-Gilui Arayos, where your problem is Bifar Hesia. That's a big machlokas, and you understand how you can't prove anything from the Gemara directly, because the Gemara has set up, the way Rabbeinu Tam understands it, the Gemara has set up the situation that this is not Gilui Arayos. In other words, the simple question is this, halacha l'maisa. If a woman is raped against her will, or about to be raped against her will, the person says, I'm going to kill you or else. God forbid. Is a woman mechuyeves to give up her life under the rule of Yahareg v'al Yavor? So you might say she's not mechuyeves to give up her life because the Gemara says Esther wasn't mechuyeves to give up her life because Esther karka olam. But the counter argument is the Gemara uses karka olam only on the kasha of B'farhesia because this is not a rayas. But in the case of a married woman where it clearly is a rayas, perhaps there is a chiyuv. Now Tosfos seems to learn beferish that even for Gilui Arayos Mamish, there's a heter of karka olam. So according to at least the Shitas HaTosfos, a woman that's being victimized is never obligated to give up her life, even if she's a married woman, because of the karka olam idea. So Tosfos clearly learns karka olam is a blanket dispensation from Mesiras Nefesh. But as I say, in the Gemara itself, you could learn the Gemara different ways. Now, that's only answer number one. The Gemara gives a second answer for Esther, and that is, Achashverosh didn't even know she was Jewish, so Achashverosh's kavana was obviously not to take her away from Torah. It was only for his own desires. Now, that answer, for sure, is only b'farhesia, because as I indicated, the rule that b'farhesia you have to give your life very much depends on the motive of the guy that's oppressing you. Okay? So, an example would be the following. If a guy goes over to me and says, violate Shabbos or I'll kill you. I want to show people that, the Torah is not binding on anybody. So if that's b'farhesia, if that's in front of 10 other Jews, you must give your life before you violate Shabbos. But let's say the guy doesn't even know that Jews keep Shabbos. The guy is just a sadistic warden and says, clean up this mess or I'll kill you. And he doesn't know it's Shabbos, he doesn't know you're from, he doesn't know, his kavana is not to take you away from Yiddishkeit. His kavana is, he's sadistic and he's going to kill you if you don't clean up the mess. So there, if it's not one of the big three, pikuach nefesh, again, it's analogous to sickness. I can eat treif, I can be machal Shabbos to save my life, even if it's in front of 100 people, if it's illness. So the same thing is true with a persecutor whose motivation has nothing to do with the Torah. So the Gemara's answer is a very good answer. Achashverosh was not engaged in anti-Torah demands. He didn't even know Esther was Jewish. His only motive was Hanoas Atzmai. Now, that, according to all Rishonim, is only a heter on the B'farhesia problem. Meaning it would not be, in other words, Hanoas Atzmai is not a heter for Gilui Arayos Mamish. Okay, there's a machlokas about Karka Olam, but not Hanoas Atzmai. Yeah?
Is it still Gilui Arayos if she's divorced?
I didn't hear you.
Is it still Gilui Arayos if she's divorced?
Are you talking about in Esther's case?
Yeah.
Well, according to Rabbeinu Tam, it would not be Gilui Arayos, Einochinami. So the Gemara is talking about B'farhesia, but all I'm saying is, we apply it, we wouldn't apply it to Gilui Arayos, Hanoas Atzma. Hanoas Atzma is a teretz only because it's not Gilui Arayos, because she's divorced and Achashverosh is a guy. So it's not Gilui Arayos. Okay, so these are the reasons the Gemara gives why Esther did not have to give up her life when she was taken to Achashverosh against her will. But then there's a second stage of the story that raises more questions. After Haman makes the Gezerah, so Esther is told to go to Achashverosh and plead for her people. And Esther made the point that I have not been called to the king for 30 days, and anyone that shows up to the king without permission, the king can kill unless he extends his scepter, But I'm at the mercy of the king could kill me. I could very easily die. And Esther says, fine. So Mordechai makes a very beautiful, powerful speech. Don't think you're going to be saved if the Jews get hurt. You will die with them one way or the other. And mi yodea, who knows? Maybe this is the very reason Hashem put you in this situation. So she says, she remembers the story, she tells the people to fast for 3 days. And then she says, Kasher avadati, avadati. Right? And as I have been lost, so I may be lost. Enigmatic phrase. So the Gemara in Megillah explains it the following way. Just as I have lost my parents, because Esther was an orphan, so too I will now lose my husband. It's hard to understand if there was a get, but the Gemara is assuming there was no get, actually, because until now, all of my relationships with Achashverosh have been against my will. I have not initiated. I have been dragged. But now that I go on my own, if he decides to have relations with me, Baruch Hashem, he did not, but I will have acted baratzain. I have gone willingly. And if an Eishes Yisrael is mezaneh baratzain, she's forbidden to her husband. Okay? Meaning all the other times, she's an onus. And I want to point out, that's even true when a person has to give their life. I mean, although Esther didn't have to give her life, but even when a woman is mechuyeves to give her life for Gilui Arayos, if she did not, she is not forbidden to her husband. She is still called an anusa. But if I initiate the connection, even if I wind up getting raped, from Esther's perspective, Esther would say, that's called ratzon. So the question is this. If Esther is going in baratzain, then why isn't she mechuyeves to give her life? Now, the second answer, that Achashverosh is only mechaven for his hanar, that's still a good answer. But the first answer of karka olam doesn't apply here, because she's no longer passive. She's doing an action to initiate the attraction. So even if we have a heter for Esther being taken against her will, what's the heter of Esther going to Achashverosh if there's a possibility of Gilui Arayos? Or at least before Hesia. So someone is Shtelsu, Rav Kook has a tshuva in which he says that even though you normally cannot commit these averos to save lives, but if you're saving all of Klal Yisrael, Hatzalas Klal Yisrael, even Gilui Arayos is mutter. This is Rav Kook's idea. Hatzalas Kol Yisrael. Now, it's hard to quantify that. Kol Yisrael, does that mean if you don't act, everybody will die? What if it's 90%? What if it's 50,000 people? What if it's 100,000 people? I mean, what's the number? Because you're playing, obviously, a kind of a numbers game at this point. It's hard to know. You can't do Gilui Arayos to save 10 people. You can do Gilui Arayos to save everybody. Well, there's a lot of space between 10 people and everybody. And at what point does it become saving the nation? I have no idea, but Rav Kook uses the story of Esther as a heter of Hatzalas Kol Yisrael. So, the comparison to Yael would be along the very same lines. The Jewish people, well, again, it's still hard to compare it because I'm thinking out loud. In the story of Esther, the Jewish people were facing extermination. So in a very literal sense, Esther has to connect to Achashverosh to prevent the extermination of the Jewish people. In the case of Yael, if you assume with the Gemara that she had intercourse with Sisera, it's a different type of Hatzalas Kol Yisrael. Sisera was not engaged in genocide. Sisera was engaged in oppression. So even if you have this Chiddush of Rav Kook, that you're allowed to be over on Gilui Arayos to be matzil the whole Jewish people, that may only be because that's kind of a massive pikuach nefesh of the nation, but that may not encompass liberating them from an oppressive tyrant. So maybe that's why the Gemara in Nazir has to call this an Averah Lishma, meaning it is an Averah, but it was done l'shem shemayim. So, what does that mean? Should she have done it or shouldn't she have done it? Does Yael get punished for this or does Yael get rewarded for this? It is different than the Esther situation because that was a question of extermination, and there Rav Kook says there's actually a heter. It's complicated. It's not clear. On one hand, the Gemara is mishabeach Averah Lishma. On the other hand, it's called an Averah. And then, what gets more complicated is, Rav Chaim Volozhiner, in the Nefesh HaChaim, makes very, very clear, because again, this was an issue in early Hasidus. I mean, I'll give you an example. People don't realize, people learn the Nefesh HaChaim just as a sefer, but the Nefesh HaChaim is actually it's a very deep sefer, and many, many, many important things are in the sefer. But on some level, it was seen as a corrective to some mistaken ideas that took root in the early Hasidic movement, not by the Gedolim, but by followers, which kind of emphasized or brought back to life, resuscitated the concept of Averah Lishma. For example, they would say, it's okay to miss the Zman Kriya Shema because I can have more Kavanah later. The idea that in order to serve God better, I don't have to keep all of these halachas, which is really an Averah Lishma. And Rav Chaim Volozhiner goes out of his way in Shar Aleph of the Nefesh HaChaim to say that Averah Lishma is legamri an incorrect concept. It was only legitimate before the Torah was given, so even if there were general halachas, a person could make judgments that it may not apply in a given case. But once you have the Torah, you cannot make your judgments. That I could keep Shabbos better. Like a person would say, if I could just have that cigarette after lunch on Shabbos, I could learn all of Shabbos and concentrate so much better. Averah Lishma, the Averah is l'shem shemayim. Rav Chaim Volozhiner says, can't do it. Problem is, what do you mean can't do it? The story of Yael is after Matan Torah. The whole discussion of Averah Lishma is referring to a post-Matan Torah action. And Rav Chaim Volozhiner says, after Matan Torah, such a cheshbon is not legitimate. Okay, so I'm leaving you with a lot of questions to think about. But again, Yael and Esther have a lot of similarities, but there's also some differences. Now, the only thing is, if I go with Rabbeinu Tam, it might be a simpler thing, because here is the thing. Sisera is a guy. Rabbeinu Tam says relations with a guy is not a rayos. The problem with Esther was her relationship with Achashverosh was public. And that's why the Gemara had kashas. But in the case of Yael, her action with Sisera was totally private. So if you go with Rabbeinu Tam, Yael didn't involve arayos. Was she an Eshes Ish? Well, as I suggested, she might have been a widow. So she's a widow. It didn't involve arayos. It was not bifar hesya. Yeah? So if that's the case, it's like any other Avera. which could be nitcha not only to save Am Yisrael, but even for individual pikuach nefesh. That would make Yael's action justifiable and mutter, which is good for the narrative, but then you have a kasha, so why does the Gemara call it Averah Lishma? It's Bechlal not an Averah. Like, either way you're going to have a problem. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll finish tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.